All right, folks, as always, give me a second. I want to make sure we're streaming live on all the various platforms. Because as I keep mentioning, Lead Lag Live is back to being live as I do these, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week. Appreciate those that do tune in to watch these. Oftentimes, I don't prepare for these. I usually just kind of riff because I'm so busy. It's hard to prepare. But thankfully, there's this thing called AI, which helps with prep 5 minutes before. But I'm excited for this conversation because I don't really have the perspective of the international side quite like my guest. And I think it's important for not just me, but for obviously you as the listener to understand what's happening on the ground, in particular with Venezuela, which is going to be a big part of the conversation here. My name is Michael Guide. I'm the publisher of the Lead Lag Report. I am the founder of Lead Lag Media. My guest today is Hervé Van Caloen, who just came back from Caracas, has a storied background and history in the investment industry. So Hervé, first of all, thanks for being a subscriber on the X premium account. I never actually told you that in person, but introduce yourself to the audience. Who are you? What's your background? Were you not the right career?
Yeah. Good morning, Michael. Thank you for having me on your podcast. So I've been investing internationally for, probably 40 years now. I joined Scudder Stevens and Clark back in 1985, and I've been working on international markets ever since. And some people may remember, if you're old enough, that Scudder was a pioneer in international investing, and they started the first Korea fund and did a lot of pioneering by going into new markets when Korea was still closed. So that is my background. And I started my own company, Mercator Investments, a little over a decade ago. And I have a international portfolio that has a strong 10-year track record. But I think what we want to talk about it today is my trip to Venezuela, which I think is a unique investment opportunity for people who can look ahead.
All right, so let's get into that because obviously Venezuela made some pretty big headlines earlier in the year. Everyone seemingly forgot about it given what's going on with Iran. But first of all, let's get into why Venezuela is unique from an investment perspective.
So back in the early 90s, I was a King Weber, another name that has disappeared, but some people may remember. I started a European growth fund, and it was the very first mutual fund to invest in Eastern Europe. Just when the communists collapsed in Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia, as it was called at the time. And I have an experience of going to countries that go through major changes from communism to capitalism. And if you look at Poland today, it was a very good investment, but it took a long time. I mean, Poland is now the fastest growing economy in Europe, and rapidly catching up with the rest of Europe and becoming a very wealthy country because they really embraced capitalism. The Poland had a lot of problems early on because they didn't have the infrastructure. The communism had really destroyed their economy. 70 years of communism will do that. So they really had to rebuild everything from scratch. Now, if you go to Venezuela, and as we know, there are big changes coming to Venezuela and happening very fast. Venezuela has not had 3 generations of communism and the destruction of its economy and destruction of its infrastructure. So they have the infrastructure, they have the knowledge, they have the education, they have the money coming from oil. But not only oil, there's the expats, the 8 million Venezuelans living outside of Venezuela, and they're ready to go back. And they've made a life in Canada, made a life in Miami, and they're pretty wealthy. So all that money is coming back, plus the knowledge and plus the fact that they actually never went completely communist. There are a lot of private companies in Venezuela that are probably ready to come to the stock market.
Okay, so there's nothing quite like being on the ground. Maybe it was for vacation, maybe it was for work, maybe it was a combination of the two. But talk to me about the trip to Caracas and how long you were there and what surprised you.
So I wanted to go and check it out. And I did a little bit both. I first wanted to kind of just walk around. And the first thing I can say, Caracas is not deja vu. It's quite safe. I spent the whole week, walking around and getting what tourists do. And to get a sense of the country, it's a very happy place, very nice, full of hope. People are very hopeful about the changes. Actually, I think people told me if Trump were to run for president in Venezuela, he would win by a landslide because they're so happy about what happened. Even if they don't like the person, that's to the pie. They're so happy because he had given the country hope again. And then I spent a lot of time talking to bankers and financial leaders of Venezuela to understand the whole transition and the three-step transition. And again, it's quite encouraging and happening very, very fast.
Who you meet on the trip? Meeting with people that were on the ground, just locals, government officials. Talk to me about the kind of people you interacted with.
Yeah. So at first, I was a tourist, so I just talked to people. For example, there's a very famous hotel in the mountains overlooking Caracas, and you have to take a gondola to get up there. And it takes like 25 minutes in the gondola to get up there, so you have time to chat with people. And there was a young couple on the gondola, and they were from Miami, and they were actually on the first flight from Miami on the American Airlines to Caracas, the first in 7 years. And they were so happy to come back to their own country. I mean, they've been coming back and forth, but they see the opportunities. Now, it so happens that the father of that woman that I was talking to owns a tourist company in Venezuela, and as you can imagine, tourism, this is a blessing for a business like that, because Venezuela used to be a great tourist destination for Americans. And so now it's opening up again. They have beautiful beaches. They have amazing countryside. They have nice cities. So tourism will pick up very rapidly. I met with corporate lawyers. Corporate lawyers who tell me they're talking to private equity every day. I mean, the private equities are already sniffing around and ready to do deals. So there's a lot of interest. And then I met with bankers who are waiting for the deregulation that I think Rubio and his team are working on, because the banking sector is completely frozen and it's not doing its job because of the regulations, and because of the fact, for example, that they have to have 72% of their capital in reserves with the central bank, so they have no capital left to lend money. So the whole banking sector is frozen, but they're working very hard on the deregulation and to let the banks do their job again. So a lot of different people I talk to, and everywhere it's like change is coming, change is happening. A lot of hope there.
And on that hope, I'm going to assume that a large part of that's because Maduro is no longer in play. What is the mood after that took place with what Trump's actions meant for Venezuela?
Yeah, as I said, they're very happy about what happened. Now, of course, the transition period, Marco Rubio came with a three-phase plan. The first plan is stabilization. So that's why we haven't seen a change in regime. It's the president is Delcy Rodriguez, who was the vice president of Maduro, so she's part of the regime. And I think the idea was that if you have a quick change back in Iraq, you would have a bloodbath. People want revenge. People want get rid of the old regime, and they are angry because of everything that has happened. So the idea here is to calm down, make sure there's no bloodbath, and eventually we'll do the transition. But let's first stabilize and have the present regime, this Delcy Rodriguez, who is in charge, work with the Americans, and she is cooperating. So they are working hand in hand in stabilizing the country. Now we've entered the second phase as to the recovery, the economic recovery. So we have to deregulate. We have to work on the debt situation. So the privatization, the banking sector, as I was saying, needs to be deregulated again. So they are working on stabilizing the economy, and part of that is bringing down the inflation rate down. I mean, inflation was up to, hyperinflation in 2017, 18. It came down to 500% per year last year, and it's now closer to less than 10% a month. So the inflation is coming down. The direction is right, but of course it's still very high. And because of the inflation situation and because of the instability of the country, they've now adapted the dollarization of their economy already a few years ago. So they need more dollars to actually get the economy to work, because there was not enough dollar to actually get to a proper dollarization of the economy. And that was part of the inflation problem. So now with oil revenues growing so fast, as the production is better, and that the money is actually going to the economy and not in the pockets of the generals, there's more dollars getting injected into the economy, which kind of helps stabilizing the overall inflation problem. So that's what's going on. They have to kind of bring down the inflation rate, make sure the dollarization works completely, because there's still a discount between the official dollar rate and the market rate. The discount is now down from 80% to 30%, but you want to bring it back in line with the market rate. So they have a lot of things that they have to bring back and in order to stabilize the economy. But that's what they're working on now. That's the second part of the second phase of the transition to normalization of the country. The third phase will come probably within a year, maybe a little bit more than a year, and that's then reinstalling democracy. And that's when Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Prize, as most people know, and who is a very popular politician, will probably come back and run for office and will be elected by a landslide, if you believe the polls right now. So to reinstall the democracy first, we have to get the economy to go again and stabilize the whole. And so that the plan is to do that probably within 12 months, 18 months. Nobody knows. I'm sure Machado is pushing for this to happen earlier than later, but it is coming. Everything is moving in the right direction.
You said earlier something along the lines of banking is frozen or something along those lines. Talk to me about how businesses form in Venezuela, meaning where are people getting the capital? Is it in kind of like a black market in terms of lending? Talk to me about how that works compared to the U.S.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because there are no mortgages. The banks cannot lend money. There's no consumer credit. There's no liquidity in the system. So there is all this black market, and the black market is all in dollars, but there's not enough dollars in the system. So everything is kind of difficult. So a couple of years ago, these entrepreneurs came up with the idea of starting a buy now, pay later system. It's a company called Cacheo. And so they've been incredibly successful over I think over 2 years, they were able to grow their customer base to 8 million people, and everybody talks about Cacheo and everybody's using Cacheo. So they found a way around to kind of create some liquidity and some consumer financing. But all that has to change. The banks will have to be able to lend money again. And again, I expect that to happen very quickly. I mean, they're all talking to the central bank. They changed the central bank people, and so they're working on that. But it's just a matter of a few months, and then the banks, instead of putting 72% with the central bank, will be able to, I don't know, keep 15% of their reserves with the central bank and don't have that money to lend again. So it's something that will take a few more months, because you have to change all the regulations and change the central bank's mentality. But it's happening.
So when I think about Venezuela, I think about oil. I think most people think about oil. But talk to me about the makeup of the economy outside of natural resources. What's vibrant?
Yeah. So natural resources is very important, and the mining is also very important. It's not just oil and gas. And that's, a blessing they have. They have huge reserves of oil and gas, but also gold. That is the obvious origin of the business of money that will come into the country. As I said before, you have a lot of expats that will come back, and already the real estate market in Caracas has doubled, in many places, as people come back and see the opportunity to buy quite cheaply very good real estate, not only in Caracas, but they have beautiful resorts and beaches. So, the real estate market is already picking up. But you have highly educated people and a whole economy and a country that really looks up to United States much more than any other Latin American country. When I was talking to these bankers and brokers in Caracas, well, the corporate finance people, they were educated at MIT, Harvard, Cornell. They're highly educated people. We got that level. They all speak English very well. So you have this knowledge of the U.S. economy as well. And you have entrepreneurship that I think is still very present, even though they were, restrained from doing their business. For example, there is the equivalent of a Starbucks locally. Now, they were able to be quite successful because Starbucks was not allowed to get into Venezuela. But the company is called Socado, and it's a Starbucks wannabe, and probably better than Starbucks because their coffee is so good. You have two companies that are the equivalent of Uber and Lyft. They're called Yummy Rides and Ridery or Ridry. I don't know how you pronounce it in Spanish. When I mentioned on LinkedIn that I was going to Caracas and just explore, see if there's a possibility of investing in the stock market, I got immediately contacted on LinkedIn by an entrepreneur who wants to go public with his little company importing cars. So there's this entrepreneurship mentality that you don't always find in emerging markets. Just that, I mean, I mentioned before the tourism. Tourism will be huge. It's a very beautiful destination. It's so easy to go to for Americans.
Yeah, you'd alluded to, I think, deregulation as part of the things that are coming. When I think about that, I think about Argentina and obviously how well Argentina has done. I'm curious, are there any parallels when you look at Venezuela to Argentina a few years ago?
I think it's even more interesting. I was in Buenos Aires a year ago for the first time. I hadn't spent any time there. I travel a lot for my business, but it's usually more Europe, Japan, Asia, and all these countries. And I was in Buenos Aires for the first time because of all the changes and incredible changes at the political level. But Buenos Aires wants to be Paris. Caracas looks up at New York. You know, the mentality, you know, the Argentinians are still, thinking, they still want to be European. Whereas Venezuela is a whole different vibe. They really believe in capitalism and not in European style socialism. They really like entrepreneurship and capitalism. I feel like it's more in their DNA than Argentinians. Now, the political changes and economic changes in Argentina are spectacular, and I really believe it's worth looking at Argentina as well. I own an Argentinian company in my international portfolio, Mercado Libre. So there are some good investments there. But I think it's, capitalism is not in their DNA in Argentina. It will take more time. So I'm always a little bit worried about Argentina. They do the right things for, 2 or 3 years, and then they go back to the old bad economic management. I think Venezuela is a different story, and especially with America be so involved. So you have these guardrails, which are called United States of America, where they're going to make sure they keep going in the right direction.
All right, the stock market in Venezuela. Let's talk about liquidity. Let's talk about how many stocks there are. Kind of talk me through sort of the opportunities set there.
So that's where it's very early days. It's still a very underdeveloped stock market. It was even before the Chavista regime. So I think the total market capitalization is like, 15% of the GDP, and the GDP has shrunk by 70% ever since Chavez was elected. So we're talking about a market capitalization that's probably $17 billion. It's very small. There are like very few companies that are publicly traded. A lot of companies are still in private hands. But here's the opportunity. The government, you're part of the whole revival of the economy, will go through privatizations. There are a lot of companies that are owned by the government that need to be privatized. So that will come probably to a large degree through the stock market. As I mentioned before, you have these smaller entrepreneurial companies, that want to go public. So all that is coming. Already, 2 companies have approached the stock market that they're publicly companies, but they have very few stocks that are public in public hands. And so they want to increase their capital. So I think partly what I want to do is help creating liquidity for the stock market that will need it. I mean, as I said before, the banks are not doing their job, liquefying the economy. So the stock market is an alternative. So if you want to go and start a privatization program like you did in Eastern Europe at the end of the communist regime, you're going to need a stock market and an efficient stock market, and you're going to need capital that goes into the stock market. And that's where we want to be very early on and take a position in the overall economy, and then participate in the privatization of the economy, and participate in in those IPOs that are coming. I mentioned the Starbucks-like and the Uber-like companies, but there are many other companies that will come to the stock market.
I assume when you look at Venezuela, it's like most other emerging economies and countries. You've got a lot of economic activity centered in certain city hub spots. And then outside of that, it's very rural and basic and not as vibrant from an economic perspective. What about opportunities outside of sort of the traditional things that are out there, like on the public side?
Well, I think that will need a second bit. I'm going to need to kind of dig in a little bit more. I spent this trip in Caracas to just get a first impression. I do strongly believe that you're going to have, tourism going to be a big part of that outside of Caracas. Again, I was talking about privatization. The government owns a lot of hotels, beautiful hotels all over the country. That will come to the market, and that will be part of the economy outside of Caracas. Mining, as I said before, is a big part of their economy. But again, I mean, I think now we're talking about the next step. My next step to the planet very soon, and is going to visit all these companies outside and kind of get a good sense of the overall economy. Right now, we're still at the phase where they have to stabilize the economy, and you participate with the large banks, or a lot of these banks are public, large utilities. There's a agriculture business that you can buy on the stock market. There's a major ram company producer that's publicly quoted. So right now, it's more like a top-down decision. The next step will be to indeed do what you say, to go in and look at the rest of the country and the economy.
Now, obviously, you're not doing this just for pure curiosity. There's a reason why you're doing this. You're going to be launching a strategy, a vehicle around Venezuela. I know it's early days, but talk me through why you want to do that. I mean, obviously, you see opportunity there. That's one of the clear whys. But why Venezuela in particular? Why now?
Yeah. So there are a number of reasons. As I said, I've done that before in countries like Poland and Hungary. I was associated with the Korea Fund early on, and look at the Korea Fund. I mean, that was an incredible success when a country decides to open up, get rid of, in Korea was also a military regime. But then they decide to open up their capital, open up their, the economy to free market. And you let people develop their economy. So that is what is happening in Venezuela. Again, with the guardrails that America is bringing, making sure they continue to keep going in that direction, with the capital that's coming from abroad, and not just from oil, but also from all the expats and the diaspora that's living around Venezuela. There are a lot of them in Brazil and in Colombia, but also in Miami or in Canada. So you have everything coming together at a time when I think they're desperate to rebuild their economy, and they're so eager to create wealth again. So I've never seen such a combination of everything that's coming together at the same time. Even Korea was not as attractive, I think, although it turned out to be an amazing economic success over the 30 or 40 years since. But here it can happen so fast. Poland is a huge success, but it took a long time because they had to rebuild the infrastructure, which again, Venezuela doesn't have that problem. They have an infrastructure. So I kind of see the turnaround happening much faster than all the other countries. And the turnaround is here to stay. Because as I said before, countries like Venezuela, like Argentina or Brazil, for a while they look very attractive, but then they go back to their old ways because it's not in their DNA to really build an economy. I think Venezuela is very different from the rest of Latin America in that sense. And again, because of the involvement of the United States, these changes are here to stay. And again, it's going to happen fast, and it's going to continue. It's not going to go back to the old days. Now, there's still political risk. We still have to go through the third phase and make sure that Machado becomes president, and she's very pro-free market and pro-market economy. And we're not there yet. You can still have some trouble. But just imagine if you're invested in Venezuela Stock Exchange today, and in 6 months from now, you have the headlines, Machado is the president, and she's opening up the economy even more. This stock market is going to go through the roof. So you want to be there before.
Let's zoom out because you've got a very global perspective. When you look at geopolitical risks, you look at other dynamics in terms of Trump and the rest of the globe. Is Venezuela going to be more isolated now, given its trajectory and given what's happened post Maduro?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, definitely. I was hesitating to choose. I was choosing a hotel in Caracas, and they told me you can go to the very nice boutique hotel that where the Rectors used to do all the time, or you can go to the Marriott where all Americans go. But the Rectors used to be there. They're no longer there. The Chinese used to be there. They're no longer there. So they've lost, and Iranians were there too. So all these people are gone and are being concerned. In that sense, they're going to be isolated from Russia and China. I mean, that might be a good thing, because China was, plundering the country, and so was Russia. China was getting their oil at a big discount from Venezuela. So I think it's the opposite. I think now they're entering, the Western world back in that's heart of the Western world, and that's both Europe and the United States, and then probably Japan and Korea. So no, I think they were isolated and they were limited. Their friends were Cuba, Iran, and Russia and China, and now they no longer have to give for free their oil to the Cubans anymore. So they're actually getting a lot of money, and the money is no longer going into the general's pockets. It's going into the economy this time and sharing with the American country. And then the other thing is that, we talk about the geopolitics of today. Well, the oil price being at $100 is actually very good for them. So, they are enjoying higher oil prices. So not that they want Iran to continue forever, but they are beneficiary of high oil prices.
But talk me through that a little bit, because so you hear that line that they benefit from high oil prices, but does that trickle down to individuals? How do the locals feel that, if at all?
Well, I don't think they feel it right now, but it stabilized the economy, and they feel in the sense that that money goes back into the economy, which means it's dollars going back into the economy. And I was talking about the dollarization before. So, and they had a problem because you had parallel economies, the official currency, which is the bolivar, and then you had the dollar, and everybody was trying to get a dollar because the value of your bolivars, was going down every second because of the high inflation. So as soon as you had some bolivars, you wanted to buy dollars, and so at least you could keep your earnings. But there were not enough dollars in the system. So thanks to the revenues that are no longer being hijacked by the generals or by China, the revenues, those dollars are being pumped into the system. In that sense, people benefit already. The people on the street benefit already from the changes, because the discount of the value of the dollar is no longer 80%. I mean, meaning, if the official rate versus the market rate, the official rate was like 80% below the market rate. Now that gap has been reduced to 30%. So eventually, there's going to be enough dollars in the system that you can just have a dollar economy. Sorry about that. And just there won't be a difference between the official rate that the central bank is setting and the market rate.
So I know, again, still early days on the new fund you're going to launch, the structure on it. But for those that want to follow you, that want to get in touch with you, that actually want to engage and learn more about Venezuela, because I do think you've got an interesting sort of niche to focus on, given your experience and that you're focused on this so heavily. How should people reach out to you?
Yeah, so please, I have a website, mercatorinvestments.com. Please come and reach out. You can send us email or call us. We're very interested to hear from you. The way we want to structure it is that, and why we haven't launched it yet, is that we want to work with a strong local partner. We're talking to, major banks, all the major banks that are also in last week, and also the major broker. And we're trying to set up a partnership that, will give us enough insight into the companies. And then, we will be co-managing the product. It's going to be probably some kind of hedge fund, I think. So we are in the process of doing that. But we need a local expertise, because obviously, unlike the rest of the world, where I'm going to be in Stockholm next week, and I'm going to meet with a lot of small and medium companies in Stockholm, and there, I can do my homework, but I haven't had the chance to actually do my homework in Venezuela, and there's not as much information available. Although companies that are quoted on the stock market have to publish semi-annual results, so there is information, but I still have to educate myself, and I need to work with local people who understand the local market, but don't have my financial background. So I think that's how we're going to combine it.
I wish you the best of luck. I think you've got a lot of potential opportunity, not just for your own wealth, but other people that invest with you. So I appreciate those that watch this live. This will be an edited podcast. I apologize in advance, folks, or not advance. Post for the some of the sound quality issues. I will make sure that's much cleaner. I have some AI agents also for that. And make sure you follow Hervé on X and connect to him. And he's always accessible to answer questions. And I think that's a big plus when it comes to thought leaders in the space. So thank you, Hervé. Thank everybody. And we'll see you in the next episode of Lead Live.
Thank you, Michael.
Cheers, everybody. Okay, give it a second.